Hey folks, we are on stage 3 of our PAC-T series, and what we're doing is we are testing a bunch of different 9mm Luger bullets throughout our PAC-T test. Well, stage 2 was a hard barrier test, and today's stage 3, we've whittled down all of those rounds down to just 3. And they are going to go through a steel barrier test. I'm going to end up calling this a bullet torture test. Couple of different tests we're going to be going through today. And the bullets we're going to be testing are, number one, the Corbon DPX. That's a deep penetrating expanding bullet. And it jumps into this third stage simply because I have already tested. I've tested that bullet in a bare gel, I've tested it in a soft barrier, and I've tested it in a hard barrier. That is an excellent bullet in all 3 of those. I haven't tested it in today's torture test. So it comes back and it's going to be competing, challenged by the Barnes TAC-XPD bullet. These are both 115 grain bullets, and then we have a heavyweight, a 147 grain buffalo bore 9mm also. They're all going to be going through the same series of tests. We're going to see which one we can declare the best bullet at the end of this series, and we're going to start with our steel barrier test. Let me show you how this one is set up. You probably haven't seen something like this. I attached this 18 gauge steel while I was at the house, made things a little bit easier to do that. Then what I'm going to do, place this gel block, this is about 1.5 inches of 20% NATO gel block. I'm going to place this here in this thing. This is from one of my backer blocks. I'm going to place that right there, and then we're going to add a little soft barrier to this. Let's go ahead and do that. Next, I have a brand new 20% NATO gel block right here. This one right here. It's going to be placed right up against that steel, and then just in case things really penetrate, I've got a backer block here. Also 20% NATO block. Move this stuff out of the way. And we are ready for the first test. Well, I tell you, it sure is nice to have these brand new gel blocks. We can see things so much better. That right here is our Barnes bullet, 115 grain. The second bullet that I shot, you might recall, is I shot this one down here a little bit lower purposely to get some little bit different locations so they're not going through anything close to the same hole. This is the buffalo bore, and it almost looks like, we'll find out when I cut it out, that we had jacket and core separation. This over here was our third bullet. That is the Corbon bullet. And it looks like that had a very nice penetration of about 9 inches into this gel block. Now, we're not done. We're going to do another test, shooting 3 more rounds into this gel block, but it's going to be going through drywall. This is it here, folks. Essentially, an interior wall that a person, very similar to what you'd have in your house, okay, it's just a little bit smaller. We're going to set this thing up right here. I'm going to move that gel block, these gel blocks behind it. Make up whatever scenario you want, but we've got to put a round through this drywall and into those gel blocks right over there. Same order, Barnes, Buffalo Bore, Corbon. That's pretty good. Well, this is very similar performance out of all 3 of the bullets. The one on the bottom, right there, the dark colored bullet, is the Barnes. The one directly above it, and I shot it more or less directly above it, is the Buffalo Bore. And then last, a little bit more penetration here out of the Corbon. In fact, if I move this out of the way, it's actually sticking out, and I can extract it, and indeed we can see the drywall, the gypsum, right inside that bullet. So as I figured, this one did clog, and the other 2 I'm sure will be very much the same. Let's take a look at the back side. That is the back side of this drywall. 3 shots. Barnes, Buffalo Bore, Corbon. Well, I've got 5 rounds left. 5 rounds left of the Barnes, 5 rounds left of the Buffalo Bore. Got plenty of the Corbon. Have a little fun with this and see, as they say, you might remember the old commercial where that little boy walks up to the owl, the wise old owl, and he asks, how many licks does it take to get to the center of the Tootsie Pop or something like that? Well, we're going to ask a similar question. How many shots does it take to break through that concrete block and get into the water jug? I got it now. Whew, I needed that 5th round. Very good. Same thing. Wow. I was thinking that this might have the advantage with this little test just because it's a much heavier bullet. Let's go ahead and try the Corbon last. Corbon. Huh. Jammed her up. Same thing. Three shots. Nice. Well, let me start by saying that numbers don't always tell the whole story. In fact, oftentimes the numbers alone don't tell the whole story. What we have now is we have a two-way tie. We have an absolute tie between the Corbon DPX and the buffalo bore, but both of these actually performed quite differently. Let's take a look at each of these just a bit closer. In all of my previous tests, and I've done several other tests with the Corbon, in each case, the Corbon scored above 400 points, averaging 437.5 points. And when we look at those bullets, like we see right here, this is from one of my early tests with the Corbon bullet, there is very little to complain about with this bullet. It scored again in this 400 plus category. Another test, that was the soft barrier test. We did a hard barrier test, not a steel barrier test, but we did a hard barrier test with the Corbon as well, and this is the result here. Now, it's nearly identical, really, and so it scored again, well into that 400 class category. In contrast, the highest score for the buffalo bore was only 300 and some points. Actually 310 points to be precise. In all of these tests, that bullet clogged and failed to expand. And then, when it did expand, like in today's test, we saw a jacket and core separation. Now, I have not seen a jacket and core separation in a long time. I kind of thought that was a thing of the past and that these companies making premium self-defense bullets had figured out a good bonding technique, those sorts of things to completely eliminate that problem that was fairly common years ago, but apparently not. We saw absolute jacket and core separation with that 147 grain buffalo bore bullet. But I'm not going to ignore the elephant in the room either. And that was, I'm sure if you watched the video, you saw it, and maybe your mouth was agape, just like mine pretty much was when it was happening to me. That is the failure to extract. And that happened with every shot I fired with that Corbon bullet, Corbon ammo. Now, I will say, this is a first. And every test that I've done, the 5-shot tests off the bench, the 5-shot groups offhand with the recoil meter, all these things over and over again, every single time I shot this, absolutely perfect performance and absolute reliability. But not today. That was certainly not the case. And that really, really is a problem. I mean, let's say you have and we do, we have an excellent bullet, a fantastic bullet, but it fails to extract. It jams. You are in a jam, right? If you were actually using, or if I was actually using this in a self-defense scenario, and I had a jam on round number 1, I can guarantee you there would be real problems for me. Because the 9mm almost never produces a one-shot stop. Okay, most of the time, if you've studied, and I have studied a lot of the literature, a lot of the records. In fact, there's a very, very good website that looks at this. Tons of records, lots of records where the 9mm, 45 ACP, 12 gauge shotgun have actually been used in self-defense, and they looked at and reported the incidence or the likelihood of a one-shot stop, two-shot, three-shot, repeated multiple shots, and 9mm almost always requires far more than one shot. So looking at the extracted brass, what I had to do was, when I was only firing one round, the case just simply failed to extract, and it locked open, so it wasn't really the end of the world. All I had to do was drop the mag, close the slide, rack it vigorously back one time, and out it came. So it cooled just that little bit, I guess. But what I noticed on all of these cases is this mark near the where the bullet, probably the base of the bullet, was seated in this case right here. And that is not a case cannelure. That is a sign of excessive pressure. And then when I was firing, loaded a mag of 5, trying to bust apart that concrete block, it was more problematic but more realistic to remedy that jam. What I did, because I had 15 rounds left in this particular box here, I went back out to the range, because this is really bothering me. This is actually the ammo that I have loaded in my everyday carry pistol, that same HK VP9, or had loaded. And so I went back out. And because this is plus P and it looked like it was having some pressure problems, what I did is I started by firing it in a full-size pistol. Here is the Glock 17. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 shots, no problem whatsoever. Then I loaded another 5-round mag for my HK VP9. But before I went back out to the range, I cleaned that pistol, and I cleaned it really, really well. Now, I had not cleaned that particular pistol, the HK VP9. I had not cleaned it for maybe I had 200 rounds on it, maybe. And then, as you can see, I fired 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rounds, no problem whatsoever. Then, because I had 5 rounds left and my son had his Sig Sauer P320 out at the range, just happened to have that out there, I said, hey, let's see if this one shoots it without any problems. And sure, all 5 rounds shot without any problems. Every time he squeezed the trigger, it fired, never fired on its own, and that's a good thing, but no problems. So, okay, a person says that whole problem was just because you had a dirty pistol. You didn't clean it frequently enough. Well, that makes me wonder, let's say I hadn't cleaned it, just for argument's sake, let's say I hadn't cleaned it for 200 rounds. Does that mean I need to get into a cleaning regimen where I clean after every 100 rounds, just to be safe? But maybe not. Maybe it's every 50 rounds. Maybe it's every 20, I don't know. And how would you know? Right? Maybe some of the ambient conditions that day made a difference also. I don't know. And so the question then is, how much of a risk is a person willing to take? Was this just a fluke? So far it kind of seems like it was, but sure was a problem on that particular outing to the range. So being quite a risk-averse person, especially when we look at what's at stake in this sort of a scenario, I'm really thinking about not carrying the Corbon DPX, even though it really did such a fantastic job in all of our tests, even including what we saw today. But I'm curious. I would really like to see or hear or read your input. If this was your scenario, you've got this very, very good bullet. Terminally, it performs very, very well. Accuracy, it is very good. Very good accuracy on this thing. Nothing really to complain about, except it jams sometimes. Would you carry that for your everyday carry? Take a minute or so, if you don't mind. Pop in your input into the comments. I'd really like to see that. Now, when I was doing all these tests this year and reflecting back at tests I had done in previous years, I've been doing this for a number of years, one trend that I started to notice is that the bullets that tended to do the best were the non-traditional bullets. Now, I'm not talking about the bullets like the Honey Badger and the Lehigh bullets, not that type of bullet, but rather bullets like this, like the DPX, like the Barnes TAC-XPD, and like the S&B XRG. This type of solid metal expanding bullet really does well. It does so well under almost all situations terminally, and they're also quite accurate, that I really think that this is something a person should look at for their everyday carry. Could be this one, could be the Barnes, could be the Corbon, but I'd give it some extensive testing, and there are likely other bullets out there that perform very, very well. They're not perfect though. They're not perfect though. We did see that even these kinds of bullets can jam, and they jammed going through our drywall test. But they still actually performed pretty darn well. In fact, all three of those bullets were almost identical in how they performed going through that drywall test. Now let's take a close look at all of our results. What we see here in that first column, and I have these placed in the order that I shot these. In that first column with the steel barrier test, there we see the final results from the Barnes TAC-XPD. The middle column from the 147 grain buffalo bore, and in the right column the 115 grain Corbon DPX. Boy, that Corbon really does a nice job though. I mean, 9¼ inches of penetration. Both the Barnes and the Corbon retained all of their weight. The buffalo bore, remember, it had a core and jacket separation, so kind of hard to deal with that. You saw that the core, the lead core, penetrated more deeply than the much lighter, less dense copper jacket. And then, of course, we see the expansion. That expansion does an awful lot of the lethality type of work that is so important with a self-defense bullet. Yes, that bullet's got to penetrate. That bullet has to expand, and it has to expend its energy inside that target. All very, very important parts of it, but of course we also have to hit our target, so accuracy, precision can't be ignored either. The winner, as you saw, of that first go-round was the Corbon bullet, 327.5. None of these bullets got into our 400 club simply because that steel barrier plus test was quite a test. The temporary wound channel for most of these bullets, the Barnes bullet we're looking at right here, the buffalo bore bullet that we're looking at, didn't look all too impressive. But the most impressive looking one, again, I would say is the Corbon. Produced a fairly good size temporary wound channel, transient cavitation channel going through that steel, 18 gauge steel plate. Now, by the way, I didn't show this when we're out at the range, but here is what that 18 gauge steel looked like after shooting all 3 rounds through it. Can't really tell which one's which other than knowing where they were placed, which bullet went through which, but gee, each of those really put a serious hole through that steel barrier. And here are the results with our drywall test. In this case, the overall total score was led by that 147 grain buffalo bore. Why is that? Well, with the scoring mechanism, once you exceed 16 inches, even by a quarter of an inch, that protocol reduces or detracts some points from the overall score. So that's why the Corbon bullet did not score as well as the buffalo bore. Actually ended up scoring perfectly the same as our Barnes TAC-XPD. And here again we're looking at the temporary wound channel. This is for the Barnes bullet. Doesn't look too bad. The buffalo bore a little bit better. Notice also that it dipped. It did not travel straight through that gel block. Not a real big thing, but I'll just point that out. But then take a look at that temporary wound channel from the Corbon. Tremendous. That is tremendous. Again, gee, that's a good bullet. Really is. So looking at all of these results, it really is difficult for me to move away from the Corbon, but I'm not convinced yet what I'm going to do because, well, one round will perform really, really well, but if I ever need it, and I hope I don't, but if I ever need it, I'm probably going to need more than one. And what if that bullet jams again? And you know, before we wrap all this up, we had one more test. It was kind of for the fun of it. It was that concrete test with that half-gallon jug filled with water sitting out there. How many rounds does it take to punch into that concrete block or through the concrete block and into the milk jug? 5 rounds were required. Probably should have been 4 rounds for the Barnes. If I could have placed my bullet exactly where I wanted it in the first place, it would have been in 4 rounds. But okay, 3 rounds for the buffalo bore, 3 rounds for the Corbon. But it ended up being kind of interesting because I was able to recover some of the bullets from that test. What we have here, I think that this was round number 4, was sitting just right out there by the concrete block itself. And then round number 5, look at how nicely it actually started to expand pretty darn nicely as it was fired. This is probably the 5th round right here, almost certainly. And I also got the 3rd round from inside the milk jug, the water jug. This is the Corbon bullet. Kind of wanted to expand, didn't do too much that way, but of course it did get in after only 3 shots. Well, once again, I'd really like to hear your input on our final test. Officially, by the numbers, looking at all of these performance metrics, including the subjective review of the temporary wound channel, looking back at all the past results, performance on these bullets, I will say, by the numbers, that the Corbon DPX wins. But, as you know, that's not the entire story. As Paul Harvey used to say, and now the rest of the story. If I was only given these 3 rounds, that's the only thing available on the shelves of the sport shop when I went in, and knowing what I know about all 3 of these bullets with all the different tests we've done with them, I'm really seriously thinking about changing to this. I know it ended up in 3rd place in our test today. But looking back at what it has done and the consistency, the reliability of this thing right here, I'm really thinking this may be the best bet for me. But I'm not convinced. I'd really like to hear input from you. Hope you can provide some of that in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed our test.